it. Now this one I gotta mute. I'll just keep it over there. All right, here we go. Admit all. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to listen to some tunes for a couple minutes, just as people trickle in, and we will get started really, really soon. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome, welcome everyone. We'll get started in just another minute.
Yo, Edinburgh and Glasgow and Wales, you'll stay up late for this. I appreciate it. And Berlin.
Wow. Okay, I have stopped the music, so we are about to get started. Welcome everybody to the introduction to the Design Justice Network and our member story event. No, seriously, fuck engagement, building a more human web with David Dylan Thomas, who is here. I will introduce David in a moment, but David, do you just want to say hi?
Hey, everybody, and special shout out to y'all coming in from Europe. That's like 1 a.m. maybe out there. Oh no, not that late, but not early. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's super great to have you all here. This is an intro and a member feature event. We haven't done one like this before, so we're really, really excited. We're really excited to have David here and also just do a brief introduction to the Design Justice Network. We know that lots of people come into the network and come out or are very, very fluid, and sometimes you don't get to learn about the network, what the network does, a little bit of the history. So today what we're doing is combining a little bit of that history, but then the practical application of what people do in Design Justice Network by having one of our featured members talk about their work. And we will be doing this ongoingly. So if any of you are really excited about telling other people about the really cool work that you're doing, we would love to hear from you and then sometime feature you in a session like this. So I will start. My name is Victoria. I'll introduce myself 1 second. But just for folks watching online, there's a link here to follow along in the slides. If you are interested, feel free to follow along. It's also going to be there for you, and we'll send it out as a link after the session so you can access it as well for everybody. This is live streaming to YouTube right now. So just in terms of consent, we want to remind you that if you don't want to be seen or visibly seen or have your name be written out, you can keep your cameras off for those who are watching on Zoom, or you can change your name in the Zoom so that you are able to be unidentified if you wish to. But we totally welcome people keeping their cameras on and chatting in the chat, and we'll have a Q&A at the end. So with that being said, I'm gonna get us started. So this is me. My name is Victoria Barnett. I am based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, which is the territories of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabeg, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Mississauga, and Huron-Wendat. I work as our node and working group manager. I also do a lot of support within the Design Justice Network. Being based in Toronto, I'm part of our Toronto node, and I also work as a freelance digital graphic and web designer. All of our contractors and our steering committee members hold lots of different roles and titles, and so you're just learning a little bit about me. I also want to shout out to Renee Joy, who is here. She is our other contractor, who's our DJN storyteller. I don't have an image slide of her today, but do you just want to say hello, Renee Joy?
Sure. Thank you, Victoria. Hello, everyone. It's really exciting to be here today to share the session with you and welcome you all here.
And David said hi, but anything else you want to add in now before I start, David?
No, I'm just excited to get started.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to move through this within between 5 to 10 minutes so that we have a bit of background and history, and then I'm going to welcome in David for their talk. So what is design justice? A big question, especially for folks who've never heard about it. What I'll say quickly is that visually on the screen, you'll see designjustice.org. You see a picture of the design justice community-led practices to build the worlds we need, and an introduction to design justice, a resource. These are there for you to access and look at later. It goes into much more in-depth history of what design justice is than I can go through in 5 minutes. So they're there as resources for you, and I highly encourage if you want to find out more. But I'm going to give us an overview. So what is design justice? It's a framework of analysis for how design, whether of images, objects, the built environment, or socio-technical systems, almost anything you can imagine, influences the distributions of benefits and burdens between various groups of people. What does that mean? I will explain. But before I explain, I forgot about this. I just wanted to acknowledge that design justice and the Design Justice Network has come from lots of people, lots of thoughts and philosophies that we always try to recognize in our work. I can't go in depth in a lot of these right now, but these are just a few of some of the amazing groups and organizations that have built the space for design justice to create itself and continue to evolve. A lot of those are links, so you can click them to find out more as well about these awesome folks. So now what I have on the screen is a circle in the middle that says design process with 3 pink dots. And then on the outside are blue greeny dots. What this is showing you is a typical design process. By that, I mean the people who are holding the most power are those pink dots, and they're on the inside of the circle because they are a part of that design process. Whereas the people who tend to have the less power or less decision-making options in a process, in a design process, are often left out of that process or are just over here floating in the world. So this is what the typical design process would look like. Next, I will go to say the sort of how and why we talk about this in design justice when we're talking about it, and when, as I mentioned, the distribution of benefits and harms. What we're looking at or trying to talk about is the distribution of those benefits. So when the network started, or before the principles were created, some of us were kind of talking about these three questions that you see: who was involved in the process, who was harmed, and who benefited. And when we look at any typical design process, if I just raise the idea of talking about building an Apple Watch or an Apple computer, if we look at these questions, who was involved in the process, who was harmed, and who benefited, we see that most of the time the people who were involved are those with more power, those who are harmed are without as much power in that process, and those who benefit tend to also be people involved in the process, or people who make a lot of money from getting that Apple Watch or computer. And so to further explain this, well, it's kind of what I was just saying, but you see benefits in the middle, where less benefits are going to those with less power, and more benefits are going to those with more power. And the vice versa, or the same thing, is that the harms tend to go to those with more power, and those with less power sorry, I said the wrong thing. The harms tend to go to those with the least amount of power, and less harms goes to those with more power in that process. So when we're looking at or talking about design justice, we're talking about the expansion of that design process to include the people who are normally outside of that process, and actually centering them in that process. So you'll see now the circle is a lot bigger. The green dots, who were in the first image on the outside of the process, are at the center of that design process. They are being asked the right questions. The design that is being created is being made for and with them. And those with the power are still part of that process, but they're more on the periphery of the process, helping maybe for it to happen, but making sure that those who are most affected are staying at the center of that process. And so design justice as a network is a growing community of practice that focuses on those equitable distribution of the benefits and the burdens, which means that there's meaningful participation in those decisions that are being made, and really importantly, a recognition of the community-based, Indigenous, and diasporic design traditions, knowledge, and practices. So we're not building something new, we're taking what people already know and have been doing for a long time and pulling it into the process to figure out what that next thing is that needs to happen. And so now I'll talk really briefly about the network. The network of design justice started back in 2015. It wasn't even yet called a network at that time. But the image that you see on screen is from a conference, which some of you may have heard about. It's called the Allied Media Conference. It was taking place every year in Detroit, and is a biannual conference now. And it's a really amazing space that a lot of folks were able to gather in. And this is where the design justice principles and the network was born. So this image that you see is of a bunch of different designers, community organizers, technologists, writers, you name it. There were those types of folks in the room, different forms of creative avenues and skills. And what folks did was come into the room, and we had a session that was called Generating Shared Principles for Design Justice. And the goal of that workshop was to move beyond the ideas of social impact design or design for good. people were talking about those, and those are key phrases that we still hear these days. But the idea behind thinking about design from a justice lens was to challenge those sort of normative ways of thinking of design for good, because those design for good or for social impact aren't necessarily enough, or maybe not enough, but they the idea was to challenge designers to think about how our good intentions aren't always going to be good enough, and they aren't practicing principles of justice whereby people are involved in a process and helping to shape it. And as I mentioned, a lot of those philosophies and historical things came from other people, other amazing organizations that helped inspire this space to take place. And so in this session that happened, we used that chart, and I'll go back a couple slides just to show it. We used this chart here of who was involved, who was harmed, and who benefited. And we talked about different projects that in that current moment were happening in Detroit, in the city. And the one that I most frequently or the one that rings the loudest to me, or that I always remember that we used by using this chart here, was a student who had developed a jacket, a winter jacket, that could turn into a sleeping bag. And the idea was that that would help the people, the houseless population, have both a jacket to sleep in and a sleeping bag to sleep in, because they would be without a house. And so what we did was we asked these questions: who was involved in that process, who was harmed, and who benefited? And what we saw was the people who are involved are students who went out to a university, who funded it, big companies and corporations that are causing the issues of homelessness in Detroit in the first place. And then who actually benefited? Well, the student and those companies and corporations, because they looked good by developing something that was a jacket and a sleeping bag, but they were also the main causes of the houselessness in the city. So we looked at it from this perspective and noticed, hey, like this isn't okay. And so that's where the design justice principles were formed, in that first room, in this room here. And then over the years, they evolved from handwritten paper and notes that we saw. There was a year or two of editing and re-editing, changing the words. A lot of the people that were in that first session helped evolve the principles into what they are today, which are 10 principles. And then officially in 2018 is when we were able to launch the principles. And now folks can sign on to them. Folks can add more to them if something's missing. And an important part of the design justice principles is that they can and they should evolve as things change or as new things are needed. And so what you see on the screen right now is a really beautifully illustrated version of the design justice principles that one of our members did this beautiful drawing for us at a session maybe a couple years ago now. And so it's just a really beautiful way to show you all the 10 principles in one slide. Otherwise, sometimes we use all of them across. But I hope that you've seen them. If you haven't seen them, maybe Renee Joy, could you paste a link to the principles in the chat? I didn't think about that. So, but you can read them, you can sign on to them. And the idea is to use them as a goal, or as a framework to help you do the work that you're already doing in whatever field that you're in. And now to super briefly touch on the structure, because I don't want to take too long. In terms of the network, Design Justice Network, we have folks that sign on to the principles, the ones that Renee Joy just pasted there. We have members who take another step and have the ability to join the steering committee or working groups or local nodes. And and members pay a small fee or do an in-kind donation of something to the network in order to be able to participate in these things. But all of our local nodes and working groups are open to everyone and everyone. We just say that it's great if you can sign on to the design justice principles. And there are links so you can read more if you'd like. This is just a quick some ways to get involved in the network, which is signing on to the principles, subscribing or following us on any of our social medias, or joining some of the nodes or working groups, starting your own, and attending sessions like this that we host ever so often. We also have lots of resources for folks to read. So the book that I already mentioned, some of our zines, they're free and easy to download online. We've created some activities that people can use, so that that Venn diagram that I said, we've created an activity that you could take and use in your own organization, your own structures, your own networks, if things like that are useful to you. There's lots of ways to volunteer, translating various parts of the network, helping with our communications, joining any of those nodes or working groups. I'm sorry, I can't delve into all of them, but for questions and answers, I will definitely be here. And we also developed, this is really important, a collective mission, vision, and intentions with the help of our members over a few years. It was a beautiful process, and it's there and live that folks can read it and hopefully it resonates with you in some way. And so, yeah, I am ready to now pass the torch over to David. This is just the last slide of become a signatory or a member if you wish, but I'm going to stop sharing. And wow, it's really cool to see so many people on at the same time. It tells me right now that there's 92 people here with us, but I also know that some folks are watching us through our YouTube channel. So now I'm going to bring in David. I'm going to give David's introduction and then pass the torch over to David to talk about the amazing, cool things that he does. And so David is a member of the Design Justice Network, and I've explained a little bit about what that is, but the important part of being a member is just being in community with each other, alignment around the design justice principles, and creating a space of safety for members within the network. So that's why there's a small fee if you wish to pay it, or in-kind donations. The goal isn't to accumulate tons of money and have lots of members. It's more, let's support and highlight the work that our members are doing. And so now to introduce David, author of Design for Cognitive Bias, a creator and host of the Cognitive Bias Project, and a 23-year practitioner of content strategy and UX, who has consulted major clients in entertainment, healthcare, publishing, finance, and retail. As the founder and CEO of David Dillon Thomas LLC, he offers workshops and presentations on inclusive design, the role of bias in making decisions, and he has presented at TEDNYC, SXSW Interactive, Confab, an event apart, IxDA's Tokyo, and more topics at the intersection of bias, design, and social justice. So I pass you over to David, who's giving us a brief talk on something he's going to be leading on September 13th, but I will let David tell you a little bit more about that. Take it away, David.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Victoria, and DJN in general for hosting this. I just want to say I am a proud member of the DJN Philly node. Shout out to Philly. And I see a lot of Pennsylvania folks on the call right now. Trust me, join up with your local node. It's awesome. So I'm going to share my screen. And I hope you all can see this now. So yeah, today I'm going to give you a short version of a much longer talk that I'm going to be giving on September 13th. There are still slots open, but not many. So if you do like this talk, you might want to immediately jump over there, and we're going to add links and stuff so you can do that. But the topic is no, seriously, fuck engagement, building a more human web. So here comes kind of the short version of that. And I am David Dylan Thomas. Intro has been done already, so I'll kind of skip that and just jump to this part. So I wrote this book, Designed for Cognitive Bias, and I'm going to give you a spoiler for that. The end of the book, I give this quote from Martin Luther King. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. Now, for the purposes of this talk, I want to focus on that first sentence. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. By the way, he gave this speech like 50 years ago, so we've kind of missed the boat on the whole rapidly part. But if we believe this is a good idea, going from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society, the question I want to ask is this: what is our role in that shift? As designers, project managers, whatever it is that we do, whatever we contribute, what's our role in that shift? Now, in order to talk about this, we are going to talk about genocide. We are going to see a couple examples of hate speech. I want to give you that warning from the jump. But first, we need to discuss how the mirror ruined everything. If you go far enough back, if you wanted to see what you looked like, you pretty much had to stumble upon a still body of water, like a pond or something, like our friend Narcissus here, right? Otherwise, you don't know if you got some schmutz on your face. You can see your hands, you can see the environment, other people, but what you look like, what your sense of self is you could go your whole life, never know. Now, around the Renaissance, we start to get good enough at creating mirror technology that you can pretty reliably see yourself every day. And this has interesting impacts, again, upon that sense of self. Historian Morris Berman writes, we find a sharp, simultaneous increase in self-awareness and in the quantity and technical quality of mirror reproduction. What does he mean? Well, we start to see an increase in self-portraiture, which, of course, right? If I can't see what I look like, it's kind of hard to paint a self-portrait. But we also see an increase in first-person narratives. Now, we had the technology for first-person narratives already. We had the word I, but we didn't start using it a lot until we had the mirror. We also start to see an increase in books on etiquette, because not only can I see what I look like, I can see what I look like to other people. And so all of a sudden, self-consciousness becomes a thing. How should I behave around other people? Now, it isn't just these things we see an increase in around the time we get the mirror. We also see an increase in standing armies, because it's not just people who can see what they look like to other people. Nation states can see what they look like to other nation states. And maybe I look like a tasty treat. So maybe instead of having to raise an army every time I want to go to war, we're just going to have one lying around all the time. Now, that's what we get just from having one mirror we look at maybe once or twice a day. But what do you think would happen if the entire world were mirrors? Well, online, it's kind of true. I defy you to go to a single website that you go to every day that doesn't have a logged in state, right? Personalization is everywhere. And you could be forgiven for thinking that the entire world revolves around you, because online it kind of does, right? The web you see, for the most part, is not the web I see. It is all personalized to our particular point of view. Now, it was not always thus, right? If you go far enough back, the web is basically this weird art gallery, right? This weird journal. People are just posting random shit. And none of it is personalized. The web that I see is the web that you see. And to this day, thankfully, Homestar Runner is still unpersonalizable. There is no logged in state for Homestar. So the Homestar that you see is the Homestar that I see. And it's bad enough that we can't get away from ourselves, but the version of ourselves isn't just any old version. It's the product version of ourselves. The reason being that the data that's used to personalize those websites is the data that's interesting to advertisers, because that's how we're funding the personalization in the first place. So really what I'm seeing is the version of myself that's susceptible to ads, my interests, my likes. And that has knock-on effects, because if I see myself as a product, I start to sell myself as a product, right? Here's me on Instagram. Oh, look at me. I'm in Berlin having a cappuccino. Aren't I cool, right? And all the filters and digital tools we use to make ourselves look good, those are the exact same tools that marketers use to make their products look good. And Instagram already knows this is a bad idea. Their own research tells them that teen girls are having terrible self-image issues and mental health issues based on the idea that they are productizing themselves and comparing themselves to other teen girls who are productizing themselves. Now, why am I coming so hard for personalization? And keep in mind that whole bit about I've worked with all these retail brands and all of that other stuff. A lot of that work I did was personalization. So I'm part of the problem, right? So why am I coming so hard for personalization? Well, it's because a lot of that personalization is in the interest of engagement, right? The more personalized a website is, the more engagement we think it'll get us. But here's the problem with engagement. This is the natural engagement pattern. Facebook released this in 2018 to describe what they were seeing on their platform. And what they're seeing is, as a piece of content goes from being allowed content, right? So your cat photos, whatever, to prohibited content, you know, misinformation, hate speech, engagement skyrockets. Our research suggests that no matter where we draw the line for what is allowed, as a piece of content gets close to that line, people will engage with it more on average, even when they tell us afterwards they don't like the content. They don't even have to like it. They will still engage with it more. And it actually doesn't matter where they draw the line. As soon as it starts to become prohibited, people will engage with it more. Now think about that for a second, right? If your business model is based on getting more engagement and you get more engagement with more hate speech, guess what? Your business model is based on hate speech. I had a friend who used to work at Facebook, and part of her job was to track misinformation. One of the key signals she had that a piece of content was misinformation was the number of times it was shared. The more times it was shared, the more likely it was to be misinformation. Now, the only thing more infuriating than this statement is the person who said it. Zuck knew that shit. And this has consequences. And the event I'm going to tell you about happened before they published this, but I promise you they kept doing the same shit after they published this. So in 2017, 10,000 Rohingya Muslims were killed during a military crackdown in Buddhist majority Myanmar. The survivors created a lawsuit against Facebook because of their involvement. In an open letter to Facebook, some of the people bringing the lawsuit said Facebook's algorithms amplified hate speech against the Rohingya people. The firm failed to invest in moderators and fact checkers who knew about the political situation in Myanmar. And here's the thing, this was a known factor. People knew what would happen if hate speech ended up on Facebook in Myanmar. This wasn't like a secret. The company failed to take down posts or delete accounts that incited violence against Rohingya. And I'm going to show you a couple of these posts, and you will be shocked that they were not taken down immediately. The lawsuit itself states that Facebook was willing to trade the lives of the Rohingya people for better market penetration in a small country in Southeast Asia. And Facebook admitted it. They said, yeah, we were used to incite offline violence in Myanmar. They didn't even deny it. Here's one of the statements. And here is another. No, seriously, fuck engagement. Now, as I said, after that, Facebook did the whole natural engagement pattern post, which you can see online, but then they didn't change their ways. My dad's from Ethiopia, and the exact same shit went down in Ethiopia. Facebook was charged with inciting violence there. It's the Ethiopian-Tigray War. You can look this up. So this hasn't changed. So if that is what the web looks like when we are thing-oriented, what might it look like if we're people-oriented, right? What might it look like if business were unusual? All right, so to do that, we're going to look at a couple of indigenous nations. One of them is the Sexika Nation. You can find them around Alberta, Montana area. They're part of the Blackfoot Confederacy. And they came on my radar when I was reading an article about this guy. This is Abraham Maslow. He came up with what's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a very popular psychological term, which basically states that humans generally have 5 categories of needs, and physiological, right, breathing, food, safety, kind of like employment and resources, love and belonging, like friendship and family. And then at the very tippy top of this is this thing called self-actualization. It's kind of like just being a whole, well-rounded person. Now, a couple things about this. First off, Maslow never actually intended it for it to be presented as a pyramid. Some designer came along and just did that. Secondly, he never really saw it as something where you're leveling up like in a video game. Like once you take care of the physiological needs, then you can move on to safety, then you can move on to love. He believed people were trying to get all five at the same time, at all times, but more people had accomplished the physiological needs, and a fewer than that had gotten the safety, and a little fewer than that, the love belonging, and maybe 10% of any population had actually gotten to self-actualization. So this is around the 1930s. He has a friend who's living with a Sexika and says, hey, Maslow, come on out and live here for a while. I think this will help you with your theory. So he goes out there, and the first thing he notices, it isn't like 10% of the Sexika that are self-actualized. It's more like 90%, or maybe like all of them. The whites in the village, on the other hand, the more I got to know the whites in the village, who were the worst bunch of creeps and bastards I'd ever run across in my life, the more it got paradoxical. So what's happening here? He gets out there and he finds that, first off, the Sexika wouldn't really use the term self-actualized. They might use a term more like Nita Patapi, someone who is completely developed, who has arrived. And they didn't believe you achieved this state through some hard-won trial or going through some long journey. No, they believed you were born this way. Now think about the power of that assumption. It affects everything throughout your life. At birth, how you are raised, right? It isn't a very strict upbringing because I don't have to make you good. You're already good. I just have to make sure you don't get eaten by a bear, or maybe teach you how to fish. Crime, right? You didn't commit that crime because you're a horrible person. No, you're a good person, right? I don't have to lock you away or kill you. No, you're basically a good person. I just need to figure out what went wrong. Why did you make that decision? Why did you think it was a good idea at that time to commit that crime? So we investigate your actions, but we also investigate our actions as a community. And it ends up looking a lot more like restorative justice. But my favorite is what happens to wealth. This is Maslow's words. For the Blackfoot, wealth was not measured by money and property, but by generosity. The wealthiest man in their eyes is the one who has almost nothing because he has given it all away. They would have giving circles where they would gather and talk about who gave away what. Now, imagine you're playing a video game, and the only way to advance in the game is to not get points, but to give them away. Whoever gives away the most points wins. What are you going to spend most of that game doing? Looking for people to give your shit to, right? And this is why Maslow had a hard time finding any poverty in the Sexika village, because the second someone is down on their luck, the whole rest of the village is going to go rushing in to make them whole, because that's what they value. Now, I want you to imagine what would happen if we built the web based on the assumption that everyone is good and worth helping, not just the ones who can give us their data, not just the ones who can pay us directly. Now, another indigenous nation I want us to think about is the Wendat. So this is Kanye Rock. He was a Wendat strategist in the 1600s, living around like the Lake Huron area. And this guy was a genius, right? He was one of many Native American intellectuals whose discourse with Europeans, because that was a thing that happened, helped inspire the Enlightenment. So this guy in particular gets to know a French lieutenant named Frontenac, who was in charge of Montreal at the time. Frontenac is so impressed with Kanye Rock's ability for argument and oratory that he invites his officers to his home to debate Kanye Rock, and lose, by the way, over and over again. And this becomes part of the basis for the Salon, right? Now, part of the basis for the Enlightenment is coming from an indigenous critique of European capitalism. And the critique goes something like this. Kanye Rock cannot understand why Europeans spend so much time and make themselves so miserable trying to get rich. And the reason it doesn't make sense to him is it looks like they're trying to get rich because if they get rich, then they can, have a lot of stuff and people will generally do what they say. They'll get power. In Kanye Rock's world, in Kanye Rock's village, that doesn't work. You can be as wealthy as you want. No one's going to do what you say. No one's going to do what you say, even if you pay them to do it. No one's going to do what you say if you are literally their chief. The only way to get anyone to do what you want in his village is to convince them it's a good idea, which is why he and people like him were extremely good at argument, because it's the only way to get anything done, right? So he's baffled that Europeans are trying to get rich. And he goes further. For my own part, I find it hard to see how you could be much more miserable than you already are. What kind of human, what species of creature must Europeans be that they have to be forced to do good and only refrain from evil because of fear of punishment, right? Again, where Kanye Rock's from, you do good because it's, good. I don't have to threaten you into doing good. But Kanye Rock thinks he understands why. I have spent 6 years reflecting on the state of European society, and I still can't think of a single way they act that's not inhuman. And I genuinely think this can only be the case as long as you stick to your distinctions of mine and thine, right? And there it is. What's mine and what's yours? That's leading this need to be forced to do good. Well, what does he mean by that? Well, in The Dawn of Everything, which, by the way, I found out about this book through the DJN Philly notes. So again, shout out DJN. In The Dawn of Everything, David Graeber and David Rengro write, the whole apparatus of trying to force people to behave well would be unnecessary if France did not also maintain a contrary apparatus that encourages people to behave badly. Now, what might that apparatus be? Let's say it all together. Capitalism. Capitalism says, hey, go out and make as much money as you can. You're going to love it. People are going to love you. They're going to do what you say. You're going to have so much power. You're going to have so much cool stuff. Be capitalist. Oh, but you know what? Don't kill anybody, right? I can see you might want to kill people to get money. Don't do that because we'll punish you if you do that. Oh, and you know what else? Don't steal anything because, yeah, that would be another really great way to make money. No, don't do that. Oh, and slavery. You know what? Let me get back to you about slavery. Right? So this is the apparatus that's telling you to do bad so that I have to make rules to make you do good. And again, natural engagement pattern. You are going to get rewarded to do bad. And let me show you how much you're going to get rewarded. This is Facebook's stock from 2012 to 2022. And here is where the genocide happened. What happened to the stock? It just kept going up. Now, why does this continue to happen? I think part of it is the worst bias in the world. So people sometimes ask me, because I wrote a book about bias, hey, Dave, what's your favorite bias? And I kind of feel like maybe they missed the point because I don't like bias, so it's hard for me to have a favorite one. I do, however, have a least favorite one, and it's called the just world hypothesis. And the just world hypothesis goes something like this. We live in a just world. Good things happen to good people, and bad things happen to bad people, right? And this is especially prevalent in the United States, where the whole point is you get to decide your own destiny. It doesn't matter who your parents were. That's some European shit. We left there. Now that we're here, you get to decide your destiny. But that cuts both ways. Because if you don't get what you want, oh, it must be your fault. Oh, are you sick? Oh, you must not have taken good care of yourself. Oh, are you poor? No, you must be lazy. Oh, did someone do something horrible to you? Yeah, but did you kind of ask for it? Right? These horrible ways of thinking spring from the just world hypothesis. And the just world hypothesis does a lot of heavy lifting to make it so that we don't have to care about anybody else because their fate is in their hands, right? And there's no big bad system out to get them, and there's no big bad system out to get us. And that's the other thing the just world hypothesis does. It lets us believe that our destiny is in our own hands. All we got to do is be good people, pay our taxes, get that good job and hustle, and everything will be okay, right? There's no system. And it is a powerful thing to not have to think about systems. Because if we think about systems long enough, we realize they're corrupt. And then once we realize they're corrupt, it's like you feel like you got to do something about it. And that is scary as hell. But I'm here to tell you, there are ways to fight back against the system, even when you're in it. So I'm going to give you one example. Here's a guy who's thinking about systems. This is Will Reynolds. He runs a business out here in Philadelphia called Sierra Interactive. It's a search engine optimization firm. And he is running his business in a way that's extremely aware of systems. I'm going to give you two examples. One, custodial staff or full-time employees. What does that mean? Well, most places people work, the people who clean those places are not employees of those places. They're employees of a third-party company that place hires to do the work, meaning they don't get the same benefits, right, as the employees do, right? The custodial staff does not get to have access to the gym, right? Will took a look at that and said, well, the people cleaning this place are contributing to the success of this company, just like everybody else here. So they should benefit from that success. So guess what? You're full-time employees now. You get to use the gym. You get 401k. You get health benefits, right? You get help with your college education. This is life-changing money. They might be sending their kids to college for the first time in the history of that family. Second thing, 65K salary floor. Why? Well, if you go to their website, they tell you, we believe everyone, regardless of role level, deserves to make a livable wage. Sound familiar? Everybody is Nita Patappi. Even if it's higher than market ranges, which is why Sears' livable wage is 31% above market ranges. Now, I don't think Will would describe himself as an anti-capitalist, but that is an anti-capitalist move. Why? Because the whole point of capitalism is that the market decides the value. We follow the market. The market is God. He is saying, no, human dignity is going to decide the value, and that happens to be 31% higher than what the market says it is. Now, I don't know why Will made those decisions. I imagine it has to do with values, but I know the reason I do what I do has to do with something that happened in 2019. 2019, I was diagnosed with clinical depression and anxiety. And so I got on the meds, I got on the therapy, best thing I ever did. And one of the questions we tackled in therapy from the jump was, am I a good person? Because I would go into every interaction with another human being as a trial, right? I'm on trial for the crime of not being a good person. And depending on how that interaction went, the verdict would be guilty or not guilty, right? If it goes well, hey, guess what? You're a good person. You're okay. If it doesn't go well, oh, you're a bad person. You don't even deserve to exist, right? Now, that kind of self-talk, as it turns out, not very helpful to outsource your self-worth. So we started to pivot to a more helpful question. Am I getting closer to my values, right? Because I have values. I believe in compassion. I believe in curiosity, creativity. So in that interaction, am I getting closer to compassion? Am I getting closer to curiosity, right? Am I showing up in that way? That ends up being a much more valuable, much more answerable, and frankly, much more realistic question than, am I a good person? And let's hang all of that on this one conversation. And so that became a habit, right? I literally have a Trello list of values that I hold: compassion, connection, creativity, spirituality, curiosity, open-mindedness. And I come back to these every day. And when I have a hard decision to make, I can look at this and I can say, hey, which choice is probably more compassionate? Which choice enables creativity, right? So I want you to ask yourself, you know, we saw what Will is willing to leave money on the table for. What are you willing to leave money on the table for? What are the things your company is willing to leave money on the table for? Would they be willing to do business with a company based in a country that will stone people for being gay? What are the things your shareholders are willing to leave money on the table for? Is there anything your shareholders are willing to leave money on the table for? The shorter that list is, the more unethical your company might be. So, manifesto time. We must assume that it is good for tech to be connected to our values. Right now, we don't. We only connect it to things that will make us money. We've built a web that is indifferent to human dignity. We must do better, and I believe we can do better. So what if engagement were measured by the number of people you helped? What if the web reflected back to me was the real me, not the sellable me, but what I actually believe, my values, right? And what if the web reflected back to me wasn't just about me? What if it was people I can help? A friend of mine was ordering something off of like GrubHub, and his daughter said, okay, well, that's great. Can we also order some for that guy who lives down there who doesn't have a house? Yeah, can we? And by the way, GrubHub, why didn't you tell me about that? What kind of a web would Kandiaronk's assumptions about good and bad build, right? What kind of a web would Sexika assumptions about worth build? And why is it Tumblr? We don't have time to get into it now, and I do get into it in the longer talk, but Tumblr is kind of the anti-Twitter. The best way to sum it up would be that Twitter is kind of like stand-up comedy, come look at me. Tumblr's a little more like improv comedy. Let's come build something together. So here's your to-do list. After this talk is over, I want you to sit down with a pen and paper, and I just want you to write down your values, right? What are the things that when you show up that way, you're showing the world who you really are? And then I wanted you to start looking at your work and ask yourself, is this stuff getting me closer to my values or further away? And if it is getting me further away, how do I get closer? And then, and here's the big project, we need to co-imagine the future with the people who are hurt by the present. Now, the forces I am asking you to fight are big forces, right? Misogyny, capitalism. But all of those forces started out as just ideas. And those ideas caught on and they made the world a worse place. But, you know, ideas like everyone is born Nita Patapi was just an idea someone had and it caught on and made the world a better place. So I'm going to ask you, what is your idea? Now, originally, I was just going to stop there. It's like, mic drop, what's your idea? Cool. But as the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, that doesn't feel complete, doesn't feel full. It feels kind of easy even. And really, this is just a long way around back to personalization. So I want to ask a harder question, but I think a more meaningful one. What's our idea? What's the idea we are going to come up with together? Not just the people on this call, but the people not on this call who've maybe been hurt by design, who've maybe been hurt by our designs, because that's the idea that's really going to change the world. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, David. We still have about 90 or more folks here in the room, and there's lots of amazing chat comments coming up here. Now it's the time to open it up to questions and answers. There's a good chance I have to turn your microphones on if anyone wants to verbally ask a question. And so if anyone does, that's live in the Zoom, do you want to use the reaction feature, and I'll make sure that you can ask it out loud? Or maybe I've turned on the option where you can unmute yourself. But is there anyone that wanted to ask something? I see Pierce. Go ahead.
Appreciate you. Hi, David. I loved it. I appreciated everything you said. A question I wanted to ask from your background, from your research, from the work that you've accomplished, are there specific examples of engagement models or websites or resources that you've seen that are either less ravenously capitalistic or more aligned with the values of DJN or other values that you hold dear in this type of work?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that. And when I was writing this talk, I kind of struggled to make sure that I knew what I was talking about when I said engagement. Like, what does that really look like? And frankly, engagement is poorly defined, like in the tech world, period. But I kind of broke it down to different kinds of engagement, like transactional engagement, like you get on Facebook. Hey, you engage with Facebook, we take your data, that's the trade. Or transformational engagement, where it's like, hey, you vote and the country changes potentially, right? And there's a transformational engagement that happens. And the problem is either of those can be used in terrible ways. And so in the longer talk, I kind of get into this more. It isn't so much whether or not engagement is a thing that is happening, it's what is the goal of that engagement, right? So I'll give you an example. In the talk, I get into this idea. This is, I forget the name of the company, but there were these two guys who ran a medical debt collection company, right? So they would buy debt for pennies on the dollar from hospitals, and then they'd go out and seek the people who owed them money and say, hey, I know you got cancer, but fuck you, pay me. And they had a database, right, that told them, here's who had what disease and how much they owed and who they owed it to, blah, blah, blah. After Occupy, they had this like come to Jesus moment where they're like, holy shit, we're the bad guy. And they completely flipped it and said, let's use the exact same database to forgive debt, right? Because again, they can buy that debt for pennies on the dollar from hospitals and then raise less money than the debt is worth to forgive it. And to date, they've forgiven something like 6 or 7 billion with a B dollars of debt, right? So they have engaged, right? With a tool that could be used for great harm and was in fact used for great harm. But then literally the exact same database, they flipped and said, oh, you know what? We can also use this for great good. So I think at the end of the day, it isn't so much is engagement a part of the matrix, is why, right? Because what happens right now with tech is engagement itself is the goal. Right? We've increased it. You need to increase engagement, right? You'll get that mandate from management. Increase engagement because our stakeholders want to see more engagement. Like I've literally worked jobs where like that was how vague it was. We need more engagement. And I'm like, what, why? So I think where you run into trouble is where engagement itself becomes the goal, and you're like, oh, that's not going to end well. Does that help? Cool.
Thanks so much, David. I see 3 hands in the chat. So I've got Asra, Sadia, and Josie. Asra, do you want to go first?
Hello. Thank you for the beautiful talk. It was very interesting and gave me a lot of questions to think about. And I especially want to, I think about it from a storytelling side and like how we tell these stories online and offline about how the world is changing. And it's kind of like scary to realize how polarizing this whole space has become and how polarizing are these infrastructures on which we're telling stories. And as you said, like the viral stories are the ones that are perhaps the most polarizing ones that catch up. And I'm wondering about like your thoughts on like how we can build these spaces or build these networks online so that less polarizing stories can spread in a way that we can build dialogue, that these conversations maybe can spread out of these spheres in which we are together with like-minded people, and actually like how conversation across these different spheres. Yeah, it's a bit like vague, but I'm just curious about your
No, I totally get that. And I think it's important to define our goals here, because I think some conversations should be polarizing. Right? When we talk about transgender issues, that is going to be polarizing. I wish it weren't. I wish everyone could accept each other's humanity, but we're at a place now where it isn't. But I think we need to be clear, like, what is our goal in this particular conversation? If our goal is, in fact, to yell at each other, have at it. And we kind of already have platforms for that. We don't really need to build new ones. But I have a whole other talk and a whole section of my book that does get into this notion of how does the design of a space, whether it's an online space or a physical space, affect the conversation that happens in that space. So a small example is if you're having an in-person meeting and a briefcase is visible in the room, people will act more competitively, right? That's like a little example of the design is affecting the conversation, making it more likely to be polarized. So I think what we have to do is kind of define what is our goal for this particular conversation. I literally have these like 3 rules of productive discourse that it's like, if everyone can agree to these, the odds of us having a productive conversation are higher than the odds of us just yelling at each other. And if I can remember them off the top of my head, one is neither of us is going to win. Like, we're not here to win the conversation. That's actually not going to help. It just makes one of us feel better until the same problem comes up again because we were too busy winning to solve it. Another one is neither of us has the answer, right? You can't walk into that conversation thinking, I know what to do. No, you have to acknowledge you don't have the answer. They don't have the answer. If we had the answer, we wouldn't be in this situation. So let us assume that we're both going to learn something from each other in the course of this conversation. So there's a certain degree of humility we have to come to with those conversations, if that's our goal. And then the other one is, the third rule is we're here to create something new, right? So you have to put yourself in the framework that we're going to build something that wasn't there before, because what's here now clearly isn't working. Maybe we need something to build something new out of what exists. By the way, that is, I think, my favorite design justice principle is number 10, which is before you go try to just reinvent the wheel, look at what people are doing already and maybe iterate on that, you know. But the idea is, if we believe we're going to make something new, then we believe we're going to bring out the best in each other. And again, it's that supposition of, because you disagree with me does not inherently make you my enemy. It's saying, hey, maybe you have a piece of the puzzle that I haven't seen yet. Maybe I have a piece of the puzzle that you haven't seen yet. But making those agreements, if you're willing to, like if you're not, then guess what? We're not going to have a conversation. But if you're willing to have those agreements and then go into the conversation, I think the odds of having that less polarized, more productive conversation increase.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thanks so much, David. It is the top of the hour. We said it would go for an hour. I have about 3 more questions.
I'm happy to keep going.
David, how are you? Okay, we
Yeah,
can
let's
stay
go.
on. But if anyone has to drop off, just a quick reminder, the video will be on YouTube and we'll send you the slides. David, I didn't ask you about your slides, so we can.
Oh, I'm happy to share them after.
Okay.
Okay,
Cool.
And
there was one other question about your September 13th event, if that will be recorded.
so where we are, we're
Probably
still
not.
deciding. What's probably going to happen is we'll record it, but you can only access it if you buy a ticket. I am increasingly, it's looking like we are going to do another one that's going to be done at a more European time zone friendly time. So if you're like, I'm in London, I don't want to stay up till 1 a.m., we'll do a different one that's earlier in the day.
Okay, cool.
Oh, and this one is almost sold out. I just want to warn you, it's like 20, 30 spots left. So if you do want to go to it, you might want to jump on that, just saying.
Mm-hmm. So I have Sadia, I had Josie, and then I have Jaime or Jamie next. Sadia, go ahead.
Thank you, Victoria. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, great. David, that was amazing. I got so much out of it. So I really appreciate all the thought that you put into that. My question was that when we're talking about engagement, as you said, the more misinformation there is often from the right wing and right wing forces, the more engagement there tends to be. So what are your thoughts on how progressives can win more of that space, win hearts and minds, quote unquote, and be able to actually have engagement, bring people on in a way that the right seems to be more successful in doing?
Sure. So first off, and I'm just gonna, reveal my bias here. I'm pretty obviously pretty hardcore progressive. I'm sitting out here talking about anti-capitalism. Speaking specifically to the Democratic Party in America, because that's what I know, we don't talk about what we do. How about just actually talk about what we do? I subscribe to Heather Cox Richardson, who has listed all this stuff, like people are down on Biden as a president, and then you read her stuff, I'm like, oh my God, he's done some serious fucking shit, but nobody knows about it. They don't talk about it. So let's actually talk about what we've done, right? So that's just the baseline. But to the point of misinformation works because, and it's not any misinformation, right? It's misinformation that gets you scared. It's literally misinformation that gets your heart beating faster. So here's another fun experiment. They were looking at what makes someone more likely to share a piece of content in the first place. So things that stimulate what are called arousal emotions, right? So arousal emotions are emotions that basically get your heart beating faster. So that could be fear, that could be anger, but it's also wonder. It's also inspiration, right? It's also joy. Those also get your heart beating faster. Really, the only thing you can share that's going to get your heart beating slower are things that are kind of depressing or disempowering, right? That's less likely to be shared. And then they were like, wait a minute. Is it really the emotion or is it just your heart beating? So they literally had people sit on their ass for an hour and then show them content and see if they shared it. And then had people do an exerbike for an hour and then sit down and see if they shared it. The people who did the exerbike shared more content regardless of the emotion it inspired. So really, if everyone worked out, they'd be sharing content all the time, right? So it isn't so much about anger or fear. I think those get picked specifically because those are useful politically. But really, it's about saying, okay, what is the story you want to tell and how do you want to inspire? I mean, because honestly, if I think about what are successful sort of media in the past, I think about activists and revolutionaries. Like, how did Martin Luther King go about using media? How did Malcolm X go about using media? How did Che Guevara? How did people who are really working from a disadvantage, a power disadvantage, go about storytelling, right? And you'll notice they focused a lot on very human stories happening at a very local level. They focused very much on local because they knew that's where specifically they could have the most impact and that would bubble up. But that's the sort of stuff I would study if I was trying to figure out, okay, what should the progressive media strategy look like? And honestly, who you should be focusing on? Because the fact of the matter is, in a straight up and down, if every member of Gen Z voted, it would be over. It would just be over. In elections where 60% of the young people voted, Democrats won every single time. And in elections where 60% didn't vote, they lost, right? So even if you can get 60% of Gen Z to vote, it's over, right? So again, who do you want to focus on, right? And do you want to try to convince red states to go blue, or do you want to try to convince young people to vote? So all of that, it's a very big question. There's lots, but the pieces of it, but my instinct would be really focus on the progressive messages that have worked in the past, because they also got your heart beating, right? You can't listen to Martin Luther King's, anti-Vietnam speech and not come out of it saying, yeah, let's get the fuck out of Vietnam,
Thank you for that. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
Thanks, Sadia. Next I have, I had Josie or Jose, but I believe they've left.
No, I'm still here.
Ah,
I'm still
okay. Go
Yeah,
ahead. Go
my
ahead.
question was answered. I was just hoping to attend the event. I'll be traveling when it's happening, so I'll just purchase a ticket and watch it later. Thanks so much.
Great.
Oh, and if you want, like, I will be doing another one too, if you want to, if that works too, just so you know.
Cheers. Okay, I followed your Eventbrite, so I'll keep an eye out.
Cool.
Thank you.
Okay,
and
Jamie
sorry,
or Jaime.
I should also mention, sorry, don't interrupt. I'm also going to be doing, so you'll hear this first, but tomorrow I'm announcing I'm going to do another inclusive design workshop the week after the September 13th one. So just want to give you that heads up too. So go ahead, sorry.
David, do you keep them all on your website? I feel like I saw on your website.
Yeah, so
events.
if you go to
Yeah.
daviddylanthomas.com, that's a good way to stay up to date. I also have a newsletter you can subscribe to, stay up to date. And if you follow my Eventbrite, anything that I'm giving out, like the talk or the workshop that you can attend, that's a good place too.
Thank you. Okay, I'll pass to Jamie or Jaime.
It's Jamie. Thank
Jamie.
you.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi. So AI is all the rage right now, and my team has been tasked by, I don't know, the higher ups to learn pretty much everything we can to kind of be like the company experts on specifically generative AI. And so in that, I've also been doing a lot of my own research and on really like the human labor behind AI that most people aren't visible of. And a lot of the times when I try and bring this up, especially in technical spaces, people don't really want to talk about it. They don't really want to hear about it. This is a very big question. But how do we address those less visible or even invisible inequalities or inequities in a way that we can get some positive change and actually work in a productive way to get people to care and to get people to, want to engage more ethically with new technology?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. So a couple things, right? First off, whenever we talk about AI, I feel the need to kind of like caution. Yes, we should need to be talking about AI. We need to be talking about shareholders more. And what I mean by that is, I was on a panel recently and people were like, oh my God, freaking out. Oh, my AI is going to take my job. And I'm like, maybe, but shareholders are definitely going to take your job, right? If you look at the thousands of layoffs in tech over the past couple of years, that wasn't AI. That was shareholders saying, where's my money? So I want us to apportion our attention appropriately, but yes. But the thing I'm glad you brought up about the human effort in AI, people don't get. There are okay. So you remember recently there was something where AI couldn't identify Kenya as an African country, like they asked ChatGPT to list African, and it was like Kenya. I don't know if Kenya exists. The sick irony of that is that there are workers in Kenya trying to form a union around the fact that they're used to help moderate the content that ChatGPT is fed on. And that's some horrific moderation because they have to look at the worst stuff that gets put on the internet, but that you never have to see, right? It is soul crushing work for which they're paid almost nothing. So they're forming a union over that shit, right? So yes, there's definitely the human labor involved in AI. So a couple things come to mind. One is the entire middle chapter of my book is devoted to how to Jedi mind trick your boss into doing the right thing. So there's many numbers of techniques to get people to engage with material they don't really want to engage with. But one thing I would really highlight here, and I've never tried this with this before, but whenever I do user research and I want to convince the client to really pay attention to something, I don't rely on a chart or a graph. I rely on the human voice. I have a recording of someone interacting with their shitty website. And when they listen to that and hear the frustration in that user going through this horrible interface, it's like cringe comedy, right? They can't get away from it, right? And it's like that does 10 times the work of here are the users that are getting lost on this stuff of your website, right? So imagine what would happen, and I say imagine because I've never tried this, but imagine what would happen if you actually had audio of one of the people, the human beings that have to do the work that powers that AI, talking about what a shitty job that is, or how badly they're getting paid, or whatever, and you play that for people. I have to imagine, and again, I don't know, but I have to imagine that's going to move the needle at least a little bit.
Thank you, David. I see Jamie said awesome. Thank you in the chat. So now we're about 10 minutes past. I'm just checking, is there any other burning questions for David that anyone wants to just say out loud? Feel free to jump in right now. I think we've answered most of the ones that have come up in the chat, which is great. But any more questions? Totally fine if not. Okay, seeing none, I will just say a really big thank you to all of you for being here. Whether you were here in the Zoom or watching on YouTube. Renee Joy is posting some more helpful links in the chat. David, if you want to put anything that you want to share with people, we've shared the event, maybe your website and things like that.
Yeah, that's all great. The last thing I want to say is join
Yeah.
your local DJN node. And if there isn't a local DJN node where you are, start one.
Thank you so much, David. That's awesome. We'll make sure that everybody who registered gets the links to all the things we talked about and looked at today, including more information on David, of course. And yeah, thank you all so much for coming. David, thank you for telling everyone about all of your amazing work. And yeah, have a great afternoon, evening, daytime, depending on where you're calling us from. But thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone.
Oops.
You can